Now, before I begin with today's Dhamma talk, perhaps I could actually have a show of hands. How many of you here in this hall are actually teachers? Just a show of hands. Oh, okay. That's sadhu. In fact, teaching is a very noble, and also respectable profession. And teachers actually they actually constitute and represent a very important component in our daily lives. From the very time that we were actually born, our parents are actually our very first teachers. As you can see from this Anguttara Nikaya 4.63, the Buddha actually ascribes the highest respect to our parents, our father and mother, whom the Buddha described as the Brahma, in our homes. And if you live with your parents at home, you are actually living with Brahma. And the Buddha says Brahma is a term for your parents, and most importantly, the Buddha says your parents are actually your first teachers. And we can see that it's a very wise saying of the Buddha, because when we were first born into this world, we didn't know exactly how to differentiate between what is right and what is wrong, and what should be done and what should not be done. And it's actually our father and mother, our parents, who have actually provided us and nourished us, and they have also taught us, as to what is wholesome and what is unwholesome. That's why the Buddha says, our parents are actually our first teachers. Even when we actually proceeded to study in schools, we have our teachers, who guided us in our studies. And also, of course, we actually proceed, into our careers. Of course, we have our mentors as well, who actually serve as our teachers. So as you can see, teachers actually, represent a very important part of our lives, and more so, on our spiritual journey. When in our spiritual journey, in our practice of the Dhamma, as taught by the Buddha, teachers are actually, essential. They actually play a very important role. Because nowadays, of course, for us, we actually, as humans, when we are in this human realm, we are actually faced with a very important decision, in this human realm, because once we are reborn as humans, in front of us, there are actually two. In a way, our path actually forks out into two parts, in terms of where we will go, after this human realm. It's either you actually ascend, as in go up, and you go to the Deva realms, or to attain Nibbana, or conversely, you could also, descend, into the woeful plains. So that is actually something that's very important, especially when we are born in the human realms, in this Manusa, realm, in this when we are born as human beings. So it becomes extremely important for us, in terms of the teachers of whom we follow. Because if we actually follow the right teachers, they will actually guide us, and we will actually be able to improve, spiritually, and ascend into higher realms. But conversely, if you actually follow the wrong teachers, and provide you with the wrong teachings, then it is something that's very dangerous, because potentially you may practice the wrong Dhamma, and you may actually then descend into woeful plains, without even yourself knowing it. Because for us, as lay people, the tendency is actually for us to just believe, because we place our faith in trust in teachers, so we just believe, everything that, whatever the teachers actually tell us, we will just take it on face value, that everything that's being taught by the teacher is correct, without actually checking or verifying. So that's actually something that's actually very risky, it's very dangerous, but that is our tendency as lay people. We just believe, what our teachers tell us, whether it is actually monks or lay people, we just believe, as long as it sounds reasonable or plausible, then we just take it, okay, that's what the Buddha has actually taught, So how then do we actually choose or follow the right teacher? That is a question that needs to be answered, right? Especially something that's actually very relevant, for lay people. But of course, that decision, is something that's actually very difficult because it's also very challenging as well and very difficult because, as you know, our Buddhist community in Malaysia, not just Malaysia, perhaps, also in other countries as well, it is actually very fragmented, because we have different schools, and we have different traditions, and each tradition actually subscribes different ways of practice, There are some schools that actually teach, that it's not really important for you to actually study the suttas or scriptures. It is best that you should practice and watch your body, your mind, and your body. That should be the way to practice the Dhamma. Okay, that is actually one side of the spectrum. And of course, you have other schools, that actually teach you, no, it's important you must study the scriptures as well, Otherwise, how do you know, whether what you are practicing in accordance with what the Buddha has actually taught? So then they say, okay, in addition to practice, you must actually study the scriptures. But then again, this problem is also further compounded, The question now is, what scriptures do you actually study, There are some schools that actually also teach, that suttas are less important, You should actually look at more in terms of what has been written in post-canonical literature like Abhidhamma and Visuddhimagga, So you find a lot of the schools nowadays, in terms of meditation, they actually subscribe to these texts as the orthodox authority, in meditation, like Visuddhimagga and Abhidhamma, and they place less emphasis on suttas. So, and of course, some schools actually teach, like for example, some say, okay, rising and falling, is the way to practice, and some say, oh, maybe you practice anapanasati, that is the way to actually cultivate yourself, But then again, there are also some that say, oh no, you must actually develop high levels of jhana first before you can practice vipassana, Otherwise, you're not able to see the real nature of conditioned phenomena, because your concentration, your samadhi is not strong enough. So, and of course, this is again further compounded by, what is actually jhana, And there's so much of debate going on about what jhana is, right? Some say that, oh, jhana, is actually based on Visuddhimagga, when you actually at high levels of concentration, you will see, this light, in your meditation, and you're supposed to hold on firm to this light, and enter the light so that, you become concentrated, highly focused and concentrated on this one point, that you see this light, this nimitta, in front of you, that's one level of definition of jhana. But if you read the suttas, jhana again, Buddha didn't describe jhana in that sort of scenario, Jhana, the Buddha actually describes it based on the factors of jhana, where the Buddha says, your mind is composed, at levels of concentration, and you're able to see, the cessation and conditionality, So you find, that this sutta jhana and the Visuddhimagga jhana also are actually at variance, So as lay people, we become very, in a way, very perplexed, right, and a bit uncertain as well, like who do we actually believe, I mean, there are so many different ways of teaching, so many schools, and it's like going to a supermarket where you need to buy an item, and there's so many varieties and so many brands for you to choose from, different prices, so it's so much so that you become a bit disheartened as well, right, and also a bit indecisive, like whether who I should follow, So in fact, we all know that has always been the problem. I mean, this issue is not so much not only affecting us nowadays. If you go back 2,500 years ago, if during the Buddha's time, we have also read suttas about the Kalamas, right? I'm sure you have read about that. The Kalamas, one day they actually met the Buddha, and they asked the Buddha, Bhante, Master Gautama, we are actually very perplexed, and rather puzzled as well, we have all these ascetics coming to us, coming to our town, and each of these ascetics actually disparages, the teachings of others. They actually condemn the teachings of others, and they praise their own teachings, say that only mine is right, the others are wrong. So you should believe in me, and you shouldn't believe in what others teach you. What others teach you are wrong. You should just believe me. That's the true Dhamma. So as you can see, this situation is not just peculiar to us, Malaysians or even Buddhists in general nowadays. Even this problem persisted even in the Buddha's time, during the Kalamas. So the question that we need to actually answer now is, how should we actually select, a teacher? How do we actually follow a teacher, for us to be able to follow the Buddha's teaching, and to follow the true Dhamma, because as you can see, as you know, to be reborn as human beings are indeed very rare, and we should not actually let this opportunity just go to waste, and to live in vain as human beings without realizing what the Buddha has actually taught more than 2,500 years ago, that ancient wisdom that has actually enabled so many of the disciples to achieve arahant shapes, and different stages of sainthood, that they are able to get out of samsara. So if you do not understand what the Buddha has actually taught, so indeed it is a waste of this very, very valuable opportunity that you're reborn as human beings. So it is our duty to actually understand what the Buddha has actually taught, so that we are able to realize, what the true essence of the Dhamma. So to find a good teacher, is indeed very important. And as you can see, nowadays we have a lot of teachers, a lot of teachings, and even during the times of the Buddha, there were so many teachers as well. Each one teaching actually having different teachings, and their own principles of their teachings, and each one of them calls their teaching the Dhamma. It's not just the Buddha's Dhamma, but a lot of these teachers actually had their own Dhammas. So if you read the suttas, you'll be quite surprised. During the Buddha's time, there are so many of these teachings. Like for example, I show you this sutta from this Anguttara Nikaya 3.137. Is actually called a hair blanket, where the Buddha actually told the monks, the Buddha says, a hair blanket is said to be the worst kind of woven cloth. It is cold in the cold and hot in the heat, ugly, smelly, and unpleasant to touch. And then the Buddha says, in the same way, the teaching of Makkhali is said to be the worst of all doctrines of all various ascetics and Brahmins. This Makkhali Gosala, is actually one of the ascetics during the Buddha's time, and he actually, and what did he teach? The Buddha says, Makkhali, that silly man, has this doctrine and view. There's no power in actions, no deed and no energy. Which means what this Makkhali Gosala was teaching is that there's actually no karma, in what you do. Even if you actually perform unwholesome actions, there is actually no retribution. There's actually no unwholesome fruits or vipaka that you receive. So this Makkhali Gosala actually taught that even if you were to kill all the people, along Ganges River, and by beheading them, and killing them all, you will still not, you still did not do anything unwholesome, and there's no karma to it. So can you actually believe this is what he actually taught? And the Buddha says, now all the perfected ones, the fully awakened Buddhas who live in the past, taught the efficacy of deeds, actions, and energy. So the Buddha says, all the Sammasambuddhas, in the past, actually taught that there is actually karmic, energy, in whatever you do, whether it's unwholesome and wholesome or unwholesome, you're going to reap the vipaka, the fruit, correspondingly, whether now or in the future, But it's just when it actually ripens. But this Makkhali opposes them by saying there is no power in deed, action, or energy. So you can imagine, even during the Buddha's time, there were such teachers in India. So can you imagine if you had been born in India, and if you were living at that time, and you listened to Makkhali Gosala, and you believe, what he actually taught, and you became his follower, can you imagine how much of unwholesome karma you would have committed yourself without even knowing it? Because you would if you were his follower, definitely you will take whatever he taught you as correct, right? Because he's my master, right? So if you believe what he says, then you can go around, killing, stealing, sensual misconduct, doing all sorts of evil karma, and yet there's actually no energy in the deed that you have done. So I cannot imagine if anybody would have actually followed his teaching during the Buddha's time. The kind of the whole ocean of evil karma that you have actually committed for yourself. So that is actually one extreme. But if you were lucky enough to have actually met the Buddha during the Buddha's time, perhaps due to your good karma, can you imagine you would have had the opportunity to listen to the Buddha's teaching, and you would have reaped wonderful benefits. So I just want to also highlight to you about this. This sutta, is actually taken from the Vinaya. This is actually not from the sutta, but it's actually taken from the Vinaya. It's actually taken from the Mahavagga. This story about Upatissa. Upatissa is actually the former name of Venerable Sariputta. Before he became a monk, his name was actually Upatissa. So this Upatissa and also his friend Kolita. Kolita is actually Venerable Mahamoggallana, right? Both of them were actually best of friends, And during that time, this Upatissa and this Kolita, they were actually, Brahmins, very rich Brahmins. They were from very well-to-do families, But they, I think, they became disenchanted, and they wanted to actually look for something, more fulfilling, more spiritually fulfilling than just being rich, and enjoying lives, So they were actually going around, the whole of India, looking for a teacher, who was able to actually lead them, out of this samsara, and able to achieve liberation, But at that time, they were actually practicing under this ascetic called Sanjaya, Then one day, this Venerable Sariputta actually met Venerable Assaji. Venerable Assaji was actually a follower of a monk, under the Buddha. And this Venerable Assaji was actually going around for alms, And this Venerable Sariputta actually saw this Venerable Assaji, and he saw this Venerable Assaji as somebody who actually, is very calm, very composed. There was this aura about this Venerable Assaji that he was actually very attracted to. So this Venerable Sariputta, or during that time he was called Upatissa, then he actually managed to. After this Venerable Assaji had finished his alms round, when he came back, and sat down to have his meal, then this Venerable Sariputta, he actually then went to this Venerable Assaji and asked him, he said, he says, bright are your faculties, my friend, pure your complexion, on what account have you gone forth, and who is your teacher? Then this Venerable Assaji says, my friend, the great contemplative, a son of the Sakyans, gone forth from a Sakyan family. I've gone forth on account of the Blessed One, the Blessed One is my teacher, and it is the Blessed One's Dhamma, that I delight in, And then this Venerable Sariputta then asked him, so what does your teacher teach? What is your teacher's teaching? What does he proclaim? This Venerable Sariputta got very, very excited. He wanted to find out what does your teacher, this Buddha, what does he teach? Then this Venerable Assaji said, I'm actually quite new to this Dhamma Vinaya, I cannot explain the Dhamma in detail, but I can tell you the gist of it, So then Sariputta says, never mind, speak a little or speak a lot, or tell me just the gist. It doesn't really matter, Gist is what I want, What is the use a lot of verbosity, What's a lot of talking about? I just want you to tell me, in essence, what did the Buddha actually teach, Then Venerable Assaji gave this very, very famous four-liner, that you can find in most books, This four-liner is actually something very, very important, and this is what Venerable Assaji says. He says, whatever phenomena arise from cause, their cause and their cessation, such is the teaching of the Tathagata, the great contemplative, So the Buddha actually, the Dhamma is actually about knowing the cause, and the cessation, It's about conditionality, It's about seeing, how things arise through causes and conditions, So this is actually what Venerable Asaji says, and then the moment this Venerable Sariputta just heard this, there arose the dustless, stainless Dhamma eye, in this Upatissa, this Venerable this Sariputta, that instantly he became a Sotapanna, he became a stream enterer just by listening to these 4 stanzas, that this Venerable Asaji said, So then, of course, this Venerable Sariputta, then went back and looked for his friend, this Kolita, this Mahamoggallana, Then this Mahamoggallana said, hey friend, I've seen you away, for a while, and then you came back, but you look so different from what I saw you earlier, you look so much more radiant, your complexion is so different, what is it actually, Then of course, Venerable this Sariputta then of course repeated this whole conversation with Venerable Asaji, Then Venerable Sariputta again repeated exactly the 4 stanzas, and instantly on that very spot, this Moggallana, or the former Kolita, the moment he heard this Dhamma 4 stanzas, right, they arose in the dustless, stainless Dhamma eye, in this Kolita or Venerable Mahamoggallana, instantly he became a stream enterer, became a Sotapanna just by listening to these 4 stanzas. So can you imagine, if you had met the right teacher, the kind of powerful, benefit that you actually get, right? And of course, another sutta I want to share with you, of course, is actually this wonderful sutta, about it's actually about this monk called Pukusati. Okay, this Pukusati in the commentary, although it's not in the sutta, in the commentary. This sutta is actually from Majjhima Nikaya 140. You can actually go back and also take a look. This Pukusati in the commentary, it is actually said that this Pukusati was actually a king of this kingdom of Takshila, which is actually somewhere in Afghanistan. So this Pukusati, this King Pukusati, he was a good friend of King Bimbisara. I'm sure you heard of King Bimbisara, right? So both of them, were actually very good friends. They actually sent each other, gifts. And they were very good friends. So one day, this King Bimbisara, didn't know what else to give to Pukusati, and he actually gave Pukusati, right, a kind of a cloth, which was actually on the cloth itself was actually sewn the teachings of the Buddha, and he actually in the commentary, he actually said that on this piece of cloth, that this King Bimbisara gave to Pukusati, it was about this Anapanasati, meditation, and this Pukusati, when he read this. He read this Anapanasati, teaching, sutta, on this piece of cloth. He actually started practicing himself, even though he was a king, he actually closed the door and started practicing, And then miraculously, he actually went from one jhana to another, and I think because of that now, he was able to realize, that the teachings of the Buddha was actually correct, So because of that now, this King Pukusati actually renounced, as a king, and he actually started looking for the Buddha, He shaved his head and wore this ochre robe, and started looking for the Buddha, and everybody in the kingdom was so shocked, and so sad, right? It's so. That their king, had left them, But Pukusati said, sorry, the kingship is not for me, I've got more important things to do, So this Pukusati actually then left, his kingdom in Afghanistan, this Takshila kingdom, and walked all the way, to this Savatthi, because he heard, that Buddha was in Savatthi, So he wanted to travel, day and night, he wanted to look for the Buddha, Then, of course, this sutta, actually said that the Buddha actually knew that Pukusati, through his psychic power, So Buddha actually went to where this Pukusati was in Rajagaha, not in Savatthi, but Rajagaha. So this Pukusati, one night he was staying in the cow shed, because it was night and he was sitting there taking a rest, So the Buddha purposely went to this Rajagaha and looked for this Pukusati, and stayed in the same cow shed as him. So the whole night, this Buddha actually saw this Pukusati, in deep jhana, in deep meditation, and he was very impressed. And then, and of course, the Buddha didn't want to tell him he was the Buddha, you know. Then he just said, would you recognize the Buddha if you saw him? And then this Bhikkhu Sati said, no, I've never seen the Buddha before. But the Buddha actually started teaching him the Dhamma, you know, about the 6 elements, you know, the earth, the fire, the water, you know, the wind, you know, and also the consciousness, you know, space, you know. Then, of course, it's a very long sutta because it's Majjhima Nikaya, you know. So at the end of it, I just want to show you the gist of it. Okay, then he says, then after that, when he has listened to the Buddha's teaching, you know, then he said, oh, you know, this must be the Buddha, you know. Then he bowed down, you know, prostrated before the Buddha, you know, and took refuge under the Buddha, and he wanted to become, you know, to be ordained under the Buddha, you know. So then the Buddha actually says, you know, you must actually go and get the rope and bow, you know, otherwise I cannot ordain you. So this Bhikkhu Sati went out to look for the rope. But while going out, he was actually killed by a cow, a runaway cow killed him, you know. Then the monks actually asked the Buddha, you know, so Bhikkhu Sati, where was he reborn? So the monk said, this clansman Bhikkhu Sati was wise. He practiced the Dhamma in accordance with the Dhamma and did not pester me with issue. And with the destruction of the first 5 factors, this Bhikkhu Sati had actually been reborn in the pure abodes, which means just by listening to the Buddha's discourse in the cow shed, you know, he actually became an anagami, you know. So can you imagine, you know, if you had met with the right teacher, you know, it's so wonderful, right? You know, during the Buddha's time, you know, those people there must have really marvelous and fantastic merits that they were able to meet the Buddha during that time, you know. And another one is from this Udana 5.3, is a story about this leper, you know. This leper, you know, this by the name of Super Buddha, you know. I'm sure you must have heard of it. This Super Buddha, one day he actually saw people crowding around the Buddha, and the Buddha was actually giving a talk, you know. So there was this group of people around the Buddha, you know. So this Super Buddha, he was actually very poor, and he was a leper, right? So a lot of people avoided him because he, you know, has skin disease. So this Super Buddha actually then said, hey, maybe I should go and have a look, you know, these people around this around this ascetic, you know. He didn't know it was a Buddha, you know. Then he said, maybe I could find something to eat. So the Buddha, you know, he through his psychic power, he knew Super Buddha, you know, was actually spiritually ripe to attain sainthood on that day, you know. So he actually encompassed his mind. The Buddha used his mind and encompassed the mind of all the people in that group that had gathered around him, and the Buddha wanted to know who is actually spiritually ripe to understand the Dhamma. Then the Buddha actually found, it was Super Buddha who was spiritually ripe. Then the Buddha actually gave a graduated discourse, you know, about dana, about sila, about going to heaven, you know, about the drawbacks of sensuality, about sense pleasure, you know, about degradation, about corruption, and the rewards of renunciation. Then the Buddha then talked about the 4 noble truths, you know, when this Super Buddha's mind was really quite pliant, you know, and the Buddha gave a talk about 4 noble truths, and instantly Super Buddha became a Sotapanna, you know. This stainless Dhamma eye arose in Super Buddha. He was just a leper, you know, but he became a Sotapanna because he happened to meet the Buddha. So can you imagine, you know, how wonderful it is if you actually meet the Buddha? And of course, another one is this Udaya, from this Udana 1.10, which is the inspired uttering of the Buddha. You know, again, if you want to go back, you know, you can refer to this sutta in Udana 1.10, where he talk about this Bahiya. You know, he was actually a bark rope wearer. You know, then he thought he was an Arahant, but he wasn't. So he actually traveled all the way to meet the Buddha. You know, and when he reached Savatthi, you know, the Buddha was actually going on an arms round, you know. So this Bahiya was actually very impatient. You know. He said, he told the Buddha, you know, please, you know, tell me now, you know, what is it? Teach me the Dhamma. What is it, you know? So the Buddha says, this is not the suitable time because I'm actually collecting my alms, you know. Then the second and third time, you know, Bahiya kept on asking, you know, because he says, who knows, you know, when I will pass away, you know, that I will not be able to listen to your Dhamma talk. Then the Buddha, you know, then finally relented. He says, just a very short sentence only. You just need to train yourself, In the seen will be merely what is seen. In the heard will be merely what is heard. In the sense will be merely what is sensed. In the cognized will be merely what is cognized. In this way, you should train yourself. You see, at the moment he actually heard this, he became an arahant, So can you imagine just by this very short stanza, when you see something, just know that there is what is seen. When you hear something, just know that what is heard. In the sense, just know what is sensed. In what you think, you just know what you think of. So this stanza, has become something very, very famous, is in the Buddha's Dhamma, that the Buddha actually just teaches this, and instantly, this Bahia became an arahant. So can you imagine? If you had been born during the Buddha's time, and you happened to meet the Buddha, and the Buddha knew that you were spiritually ripe, you would have become a saint, or you would have become an arahant, if you were spiritually developed. But of course, we were not so fortunate, right? We didn't actually happen to meet the Buddha then, and perhaps we were somewhere else, either as animals or somewhere, that we didn't have the opportunity to meet the Buddha, in India, in this Jambudipa, So now the question is, now the Buddha has passed into Parinibbana, and we don't have this fortune and good merits to meet the Buddha. So how do we choose our teacher then? What guidance should we actually follow if you want to, select a teacher? So that's why to have a teacher is actually very important. As you can see from this Samyutta Nikaya 12.82, the Buddha says, one who does not know and see as it really is, aging and death, its origin, cessation, and way leading to cessation, should search for a teacher in order to know this as it really is. This is actually what the Buddha actually says. If you actually haven't seen the Four Noble Truths about aging and death, the cause, the cessation, as well as the way leading to the cessation, means you haven't penetrated the Dhamma yet. You should look for a teacher, so that you know what it really is. You see, a bhikkhu, one who does not know as it really is, this what we call the paticca samuppada, this dependent origination, birth, existence, clinging, craving, feeling, contact, six sense bases, name and form, consciousness, the volitional formation, origin, their cessation, and the lay leading to cessation. So the Buddha says, if you don't understand the Four Noble Truths, and also you don't understand paticca samuppada, you must look for a teacher. You cannot just you must look for a teacher and understand, what the Buddha actually taught. You cannot just follow, as whatever that you hear, and then you just assume is correct. So the Buddha says it's very important. Again, this importance of looking for a teacher, is highlighted again in this Sutta Nipata 2.8. Sthiti Sutta Nipata 2.8, the Buddha gave a wonderful and really, really remarkable simile about the boat. He says, he from whom a person learns the Dhamma, should be venerated, as the Devas venerate Indra, which is Sakadeva Raja, So he says, you must actually pay respect to this Dhamma teacher, He, a teacher of great learning, thus venerated, will explain the Dhamma, to you, But, you see the second paragraph here, by following an inferior and foolish teacher who has not gained understanding of the Dhamma, and is envious of others, one will approach death without comprehending the Dhamma and unrelieved of doubt, So the Buddha says, if you follow a foolish teacher, he himself, does not understand the Dhamma, then you are actually approaching death without even understanding the real Dhamma that the Buddha has taught. Then the Buddha gave this simile. It's just like a man going down a river. This river is swollen and swiftly flowing. It's a rapidly flowing river, fiercely rapid, and is carried away by the current. How can he help others to cross? Because he himself, he actually is not equipped to actually cross this river that's swollen, and rapid and flowing. How is he actually going to bring others to cross? So even so, he who does not comprehend the Dhamma, has not paid attention to meaning as expounded by the learned, he himself is without knowledge and unrelief of doubt. How can he make others understand? You see? Then he says, but if the man knows the method and is skilled and wise, by boarding a strong boat equipped with oars and rudders, he can help others across the river. So the Buddha says, if this man actually has a strong boat and he has got oars and rudder, and he's able to steer himself out of this river, he can actually carry you across the river, because he's equipped. And the Buddha says that even so, he who is experienced and is well-trained and has a well-trained mind, who is learned, and he knows the Dhamma well, then he's able to help others, to understand and listen to the Dhamma, and be able to guide the person to understand and penetrate the Dhamma, So the Buddha says, therefore, one should associate with a good man who is wise and learned, By understanding the meaning of what has learned and practicing accordingly, one has the Dhamma experience and attains supreme happiness. So we must always remember this simile given by the Buddha about this simile of the boat, that you must actually follow and select your teacher wisely, You must be circumspect. You cannot just follow what your peers tell you, or the herd mentality. Oh yeah, this teacher, is said to be very popular, very well learned, and you just follow, what your friends tell you, and just take whatever he says is correct. You may actually be boarding the wrong boat, and this captain, may not be equipped to steer the boat out of the storm, and then by the time you're caught in the ocean, it's too late. The captain just abandoned ship, leaving you all alone to face samsara alone. So it's very, very important. So that's why we all know, is for us to actually choose the teacher is actually very important. But the question now is, so for us to actually select or choose the teacher, what are the criteria that we should actually follow? I mean, how do we select it? How do we begin with? So again, in this Anguttara Nikaya 10.24, you may actually go back and refer to it. You see, the Buddha actually is so careful. He actually, when he tells you, the Buddha is not saying that only I'm correct. The Buddha says that you can go and look for any teachers you want. But you need to actually ask yourself, and to investigate for yourself, who actually is the right teacher. That is so wonderful about the Buddha. The Buddha is not like any other teachers during the Buddha's time that only says, only I'm correct, you are wrong. He doesn't actually say that. He just tells you, you investigate yourself based on what I tell you. You ask yourself, whether this is beneficial to you or not, whether it will bring, good results to you, and whether you lead to your happiness. Then if you find, it is good, you follow. And if it's not, then you just disregard it and just cast it aside. That is so wonderful about the Buddha. The Buddha doesn't actually force. He actually asks you to contemplate, and know for yourself. And he says to choose a teacher is very important. So this sutta on this 10.24, the Buddha actually, in this case, it's actually Venerable Mahachunda, it's not the Buddha. Mahachunda actually tells the monks, he says, when a monk utters words saying, I know this Dhamma, I know this, I see this Dhamma, but this monk, despite him saying that, I teach you this Dhamma, this is the right Dhamma, but he himself is actually conquered by greed, his mind conquered by hatred, by delusion, by anger, hostility, hypocrisy, spite, selfishness, evil, envy, and evil longing. So this monk, even though he tells you, this is a true Dhamma I'm teaching you, he himself, is actually he has not been able to restrain himself, in terms of greed, anger, and delusion. And you find that, he displays a lot of these traits in him. At the slight provocation, he gets very angry. And he displays greediness. So the Buddha, this Venerable Mahachunda says, if you see this sort of teacher, it's just like a person. Even though he's poor, he likes to talk about riches, about wealth, about that a lot of this riches, about wealth, about riches, So this teacher, even though he teaches a Dhamma, he doesn't restrain himself, doesn't practice the Dhamma, and because of that, he shows lobha, dosa, moha. So it's just like this person who is poor, he keeps talking about richness, wealthiness, having a lot of properties. It's just like empty talk, right? Because then you are actually not walking the talk, right? So here, the first criterion, the Buddha says, this very Mahachunda says, you must actually observe for yourself whether there are actually any signs of lobha, dosa, and moha in this teacher, And again, in this Sutta DN16, again the Buddha actually says, he tells this Chunda, he says, one who is himself sinking in the mud should pull out another who is sinking in the mud. This is simply impossible, That one who is not himself sinking in the mud should pull out another who is sinking in the mud. It is possible. So what the Buddha is saying, if someone is really sinking in the mud and you are not out of the mud yet, how can you actually pull out somebody from the mud? But if you are not sinking in the mud, you're out of the mud, and it is very possible you can actually pull and save this person who is actually sinking in the mud, So the Buddha says that one who is himself untamed, undisciplined, and with defilements unextinguished should tame another and discipline him. This is impossible, The Buddha says if you actually are not you have not overcome lobha dosa moha, or if you are not in the process of training yourself to actually be restrained, and to actually uproot lobha dosa moha, how can you actually teach others to uproot their defilements? Because you yourself are not out of the mud yet, So the Buddha says you must actually choose and select your teacher very, very carefully, Again, in this suttas, it's actually Sutta 4.192, the Buddha actually says, if you want to select a teacher, you must actually observe him carefully, Of course, just now I mentioned, you must actually observe him for lobha dosa moha, but you must also observe him through these 4 criteria. The Buddha says, if it's true living together with a person, you can know whether this person is virtuous or not, right? Whether he has got sila, is not you won't know whether the person's sila is impeccable, or whether he guards his sila well. If you just meet him occasionally, you talk to him, you won't know. But it is through living with him together, then you know whether he actually guards his virtue, whether he guards his sila. And only after a long time, not short and not a short period, and only by one who is attentive and not by one who is inattentive. So you need to be very attentive, and you need to actually live with him for a while. Then you know whether this person actually has got virtue, And the same thing, the person's, you only know his purity only when you actually live with him, not for a short time, but for a while, for a long period, and you actually know, whether actually this person, has got purity or not. And the same goes for endurance. You know this person whether there's endurance after living with him, and whether this person has got wisdom only after living with him for a while and not just for a short time. And only if you're attentive, you must pay attention to this teacher. So if you actually meet these 4 criteria, then then you'll be able to judge for yourself, whether this teacher, is actually fit to be your teacher. You see, the Buddha is so wonderful that he just doesn't ask you to actually investigate other teachers. In fact, the Buddha actually asked his disciples to investigate he himself, as the Buddha, He says, bhikkhus, in this Majjhima Nikaya 47, the Buddha says, a bhikkhu who is inquirer, not knowing how to gauge another's mind, should make an investigation of the Tathagata in order to find out whether or not he is fully enlightened. That is so remarkable about the Buddha. The Buddha is fearless. He has nothing to fear. If you want to actually to investigate, and to actually evaluate him, whether actually he's actually fully enlightened. The Buddha actually tells the monks in this MN 47, you should actually make an inquiry. You should actually check for yourself, The Buddha says, if you should actually, first of all, you should actually ask yourself, are there found in the Tathagata or any default states cognizable by the eye or the ear, And and you should actually check, using your eye and your ear, whether there are any states which are unwholesome, in the Buddha, any defilements, any kilesas that arise in the Buddha. Are they found in the Tathagata, any mixed states? Mixed states means sometimes he's wholesome, sometimes he's unwholesome, not very stable. Sometimes he's well behaved, sometimes he's not well behaved. Have you seen that in the Buddha or not? And then he says, are there found in the Tathagata not cleansed states cognizable through the eye and the ear? Means sometimes he does things which are quite defiled, they're very unwholesome. Do you see that in the Buddha or not? And not just using your eye and your ear, and the Buddha says that you should actually check, using all your six sense doors, whether the Buddha, actually is restrained without fear, and whether the Buddha has actually uprooted loba, dosa, moha. So you see from this sutta, it's so wonderful, the Buddha really, really free inquiry, you can just investigate and evaluate whatever you want. I have nothing to hide. It's not like as though I just display as a great spiritual teacher when in front of people, but at the back I do something evil and cover myself. So the Buddha says you can inquire anytime you want about me. And I'm and you can see for yourself whether there's anything unwholesome about me. So the Buddha says that is so important for you to choose the right teacher. So again in this sutta, this SN 12.16, this sutta, again actually highlights the importance of looking for finding the right teacher. This monk said, the Dhamma teacher, they say a lot, and then the Buddha says, if anyone teaches the doctrine of disenchantment, with decay and death, and dispassion leading to cessation, that itself, is a Dhamma teacher, So earlier, what I taught you is the external features, right? When you look at the teacher, you must check for yourself whether there are any traces of loba, dosa, moha, and in terms of his speech, in terms of his behavior, but then after having checked that yourself, you need to also check what he actually teaches in his Dhamma, what does this Dhamma teacher actually teach? The Buddha says a good Dhamma teacher must actually teach a doctrine of disenchantment, and the dispassion. Whatever he teaches is actually all about what? About non-self, about anicca, dukkha, anatta, and it's about anatta, non-self, and that will lead to disenchantment, and dispassion, when you see everything, arising and ceasing, being reborn, being decay and death, so you lead to disenchantment, and dispassion, So if a teacher actually teaches you this, then yes, then he's actually a good Dhamma teacher, That we can see that from this sutta, decay and death through dispassion. From this 12.16, you can refer to it if you want to. And of course, again, in this AN 3.72, again, there is this conversation between Venerable Ananda and also this ascetic from the Ajivakas, Again, here, the Buddha, so again, this Venerable Ananda says those who teach Dhamma, for the abandoning of passion, aversion and delusion, that is actually Dhamma well taught. So again, if a teacher actually teaches the uprooting of loba, dosa, moha, because this loba, dosa, moha, it's actually the manifestations of ignorance. Ignorance, this avidya, is actually the real culprit that we have actually been going around and around in samsara. So, if this Dhamma teacher teaches you to uproot this loba, dosa, moha by developing wisdom, and uprooting this ignorance, then this is a good Dhamma teacher. Then you should actually follow him. But if you find that this teacher is teaching something else, that actually teach you about perpetuating yourself in samsara, and other things, then you should be careful, then you should be circumspect yourself. And of course, in this Anguttara Nikaya 5.159 about Udayi, also very interesting, there was one time the Blessed One was actually in this Kosambi in Gosita's park, and this Venerable Udayi was actually surrounded by a large assembly of householders, and Venerable this Ananda saw, and he went to tell the Buddha, wow, this Venerable Udayi, was surrounded by a large householders, and he was teaching the Dhamma to the householders, Then you see what the Buddha says. He says, the Buddha says, it's not easy to teach the Dhamma to others, Ananda. The Dhamma should be taught to the others only when these five qualities are established. within the person teaching, you know. So the Buddha says, it's never easy to teach the Dhamma to others. Before you teach the Dhamma, you know, you must have these 5 qualities in you, you know, before you start teaching the Dhamma, you know. Then the Buddha says, the Dhamma should be taught with this thinking, firstly, that I will speak step by step, you know. You shouldn't speak in a very haphazard manner and nobody can understand what you're saying. It has to be systematic, you know. And secondly, I will speak explaining the sequence of cause and effect, you know. You must actually speak sequentially, you know, with cause and effect, you know, so that, you know, it's easily understood, you know. And I will speak out of compassion, you know. You must have a heart of compassion, you know, to actually, the whole intention is to share the Dhamma, you know, so that everybody understands what the Buddha has taught, and you want everybody to progress spiritually, you know, for their benefits, for a long time to come, you know. And I'll speak not for the purpose of material reward, you know. I don't share the Dhamma for the purpose of, you know, material rewards, you know, and material compensation, you know. That should not be the way. And I will speak without hurting myself or others, you know. That you must be careful, you know, when you teach the Dhamma, do not offend anyone, you know. Whether, you know, in terms of sharing the Dhamma, you don't offend yourself and you don't hurt yourself in the process. So the Buddha says that these 5 qualities must actually be, you know, in the Dhamma teacher, you know, before this teacher actually teaches, you know. And of course, again, in this sutta, SN 42.7, again, there is this interesting sutta. You know, it actually records this conversation between this headman, this Bandar Kaputa is actually like a village headman, like a penghulu, you know. So actually, you do see him from time to time in some suttas, him asking questions about to the Buddha, you know, like for example, about you know, can the Buddha actually send someone to the heaven, you know, by the power of the Buddha, psychic power, you know. There are some very interesting suttas that this Bandar Kaputa actually asked the Buddha. But in this case, the Buddha actually this penghulu, this village headman actually asked the Buddha, you know. He says, does not the Buddha dwell in compassion for all living beings? So he's asking the Buddha has compassion for all living beings, right? Then Buddha says, indeed, headman, the Tathagata does dwell in compassion for all living beings. Then the Buddha says, then this penghulu says, if you have compassion, then why is it that you teach Dhamma sometimes in full to others, but sometimes only partially to others? Why is it that sometimes you teach others fully, but sometimes you teach others not so fully, you know? Then this Buddha says, you know, let me ask you another question in return, and you answer as you think fit, you know. Then the Buddha says, suppose you have this farmer, you know, and he has 3 fields, you know. One is actually excellent, you know. One is actually middle quality, you know, the soil quality. One is excellent soil quality, the other one is middle, and the other one is actually poor, sandy, bad soil, you know. So when the farmer wants to sow his seed, which field do you think he will sow first? You know, the excellent one or the middle one or the salty one, you know, or the bad salty, sandy, salty one. And of course, this penghulu says, of course he will actually plant, you know, his seeds at the excellent field first, you know, because that will actually be reap the best results, you know. He will plant, you know, the seeds at the best field, you know. Then secondly, he will plant, you know, in the middle field, you know, the one with the middle quality, and lastly, only in the salty, in the sandy, salty, bad soil, you know. So he says, then the Buddha says, well, you know, headman, you know, that excellent field is just like my monks and nuns, you know, and then the middle field is just like my the layman, you know, the layman, and then of course this sandy, salty are just the outside ascetics and recluses. So he says that I teach the Dhamma which is lovely in the beginning, middle, and end, you know, to the monastics, to the monks, you know, in spirit and in letter, you know. And I teach them actually the Dhamma in spirit and letter, because these monks, you know, they actually they take refuge in me. You know, I'm actually their island, their resort. You know, and the Buddha says, for the male and female lay followers also, I teach the Dhamma, you know, also in spirit and letter, you know, and also display to them in the holy life, you know, and because these lay people, they also take the Buddha as their refuge and shelter, you know, and also for the poor few. You know, the Buddha says that he actually teaches also, you know, these the recluses from the other sects, all of the Buddha's Dhamma, right? He also teaches other recluses and ascetics as well, because the Buddha says even if they understand only a single phrase, it will be to their long-term benefit and happiness, So the Buddha is saying that the Buddha teaches the Dhamma, actually evenly to everybody, whether it is a monastic or whether it is actually the lay people, and whether it is actually the outside ascetics. The Buddha share the Dhamma equally, without any without any differentiation, and without any segregation. The Buddha actually shares the Dhamma in both letter and spirit, Even if you are not a Buddhist, the Buddha still shares, but as long as you even understand, one stanza, and you follow, that actually is for your benefit, So when we teach the Dhamma, we must actually, teach the Dhamma in full, not just partially, like what the Buddha says here, and that is actually how it should be, and of course, we know that to be a Dhamma teacher, then you should teach everything in fully, And in this next sutta, AN 4.111, this sutta, actually records a conversation between the Buddha and this horse trainer called Cassie, And the gist of this sutta, is that when you teach the Dhamma, you must actually use the soft and the hard way, Because if you read this sutta very carefully, this Buddha actually asked this Cassie, how he trains his horses, whether he uses the soft way or the hard way, or both hard and soft way. And of course, this horse trainer says, yeah, sometimes I use a soft way, by trying to give him food, and try to give him, all the encouragement, teach them the soft way, and praise, maybe, give them good treatments and not. But sometimes when the horse is stubborn, I also use the hard way, I actually scold them as well, I mean, like really give them hard treatments, and sometimes hard and soft, So the Buddha says the same thing as well. When you teach the Dhamma, you must actually teach the soft and hard way. Not to say that, you teach the Dhamma, by scolding. It doesn't mean that way. But when you teach the Dhamma, you must actually teach both sides of the Dhamma, bright and dark, So for example, when you say, you talk about dana, dana is something bright, because, when you do dana, you have, you end up, enjoying the luxuries of life, because of the dana, the generosity you've granted. But you must also highlight the hard way, which is the dark side, which is the sila, If you do not observe your 5 precepts and if you actually keep doing the 10 unwholesome actions, then what happens is, even if you do a lot of sila, but you don't observe even if you observe a lot of dana, you do a lot of dana, but you don't observe your sila well enough, then the Buddha says in this Janu Soni Sutta, the Buddha says that you'll be reborn as a royal elephant, as a pet dog and a pet cat, means you enjoy a lot of luxuries because you did a lot of dana, but you don't observe your sila, So because of that, you actually end up, as in the woeful plains as an animal, So dana doesn't mean you definitely go to heavens, You must make sure that you are actually, you observe your sila well, So the Buddha says, when you actually teach the Dhamma, you must always teach the soft and the hard, part about dana, the bright and the dark part of Dhamma must be actually shared, when you teach the Dhamma. So this is also another very important sutta that I want to share with you. Okay. So now the question now is, we know already, right? Like I just described to you, in terms of when you actually look for a teacher, what are the things you should actually look out, when the teacher is teaching, So now I actually that was actually in terms of in terms of how you should actually assess in terms of when the teacher teaches you, you should actually assess, does he actually teach in terms of disenchantment, does he teach fairly, does he actually teach the bright and dark side, the hard and soft part of the Dhamma, But at the same time, when you actually attend Dhamma talks, most of the time, we attend Dhamma talks because, the Dhamma teachers actually teach about meditation, because a lot of us are very keen on meditation. And So when we actually select a teacher, then we must also be very careful and circumspect, in terms of when this teacher and when this Dhamma is being taught, we must also assess, whether this Dhamma teacher, himself, whether he's actually teaching, the meditation based on what the Buddha has actually taught, So you can see here from this Samyutta Agama, number 29. This Samyutta Agama is actually from the Agama, it's not from the suttas. It's actually from the suttas, but recorded in Chinese, which is the Hanjing, This number 29, if you actually look at it, it's actually translated by Venerable Analayo. As he says, as the Blessed One has spoken about speaking as a Dhamma teacher, how is one reckoned to be speaking as a Dhamma teacher? So there's Samidi, there was actually this monk by the name of Samidi. He asked the Buddha, how should a Dhamma teacher actually be teaching? When you say this is a Dhamma teacher, right? How should this Dhamma teacher be teaching? Then the Buddha says, if a monk speaks of disenchantment in regard to bodily form, being free from it, cessation, then he's reckoned as the Dhamma teacher. So, and of course, this Dhamma teacher also talks about feelings, perceptions, formations, volitional formations, and consciousness. So, in essence, what this Buddha is saying is that this Dhamma teacher, he actually, if he's speaking the Dhamma, he should be talking about, disenchantment towards the five aggregates. So that is actually what the Buddha says. The same thing as well in this Sutta number 26. Also, we also see the Buddha also talks about, when the Dhamma teacher teaches, about meditation, he should actually be talking about the five aggregates, right? That is something, that must be taught, when there's a meditation, the talk is about meditation, he should actually be talking about dispassion towards the five aggregates. So this five aggregates, is actually something that's very, very important for us, because as you can see from this SN 22.122, you can actually check for yourself, the Buddha says, if you actually contemplate these five aggregates as non-self, means it's empty, means it's conditionally arisen, then it's possible that, you actually attain the fruit of stream entry in this life itself, And the question now is, we know, that contemplating the five aggregates is very important, but how do we contemplate the five aggregates, So here, in this sutta, MN 137, you can actually read this for yourself. What the Buddha is saying, for you to contemplate the five aggregates, you must actually establish your mindfulness in the six sense doors, So what the Buddha teaches is, first of all, if you actually want to contemplate the five aggregates, first of all, you must actually have your sati in the six sense doors, So whatever that you actually see with your eyes, or whether what you actually hear with your ear, or what you actually smell with your nose, or taste with your tongue, or touch, tactile sensation with your body, or what you actually cognize, or what you think, with your mind, you must actually be aware, how your mind actually reacts to these six sense doors, because when this sense object actually impinges on you, then you must actually see whether there's actually loba, dosa, or moha that's actually arisen in you, and for example, if you so for example, like if you see perhaps something, a plate of very delicious food on the table, then and at that moment, you see that there's craving in your mind, right? The craving has actually arisen in your mind, So from there, you need to investigate, this craving itself. How does it actually arise? Or this craving itself, it arises, because of pleasant feelings, right? And how does this pleasant feeling arise? It's actually because of thought. And you think that this is actually a very delicious plate of spaghetti, or your favorite food, And how does this thought arise? It's because of perception, And how does this perception arise? It's actually because of contact. And how does contact arise? It's because of eye consciousness. And how does eye consciousness arise? Oh, it's actually because of the eye getting in contact with this plate of delicious food. So as you can see, this craving itself is conditionally arisen through causes and conditions. And if you actually contemplate six sense doors in this way, you are actually contemplating five aggregates already. If you think about it carefully, craving, when you start with craving, craving itself is actually volitional formation. And then your feelings, perceptions, and your thoughts, all these are also, they are actually perceptions and also perceptions and also feelings, right? So you have actually volitional formations, perceptions, feelings, and then you actually come into contact, your eye consciousness. So consciousness is also there, and the food and the eye that comes into contact with the food, that itself is actually in terms of form. So if you actually analyze this in this way, you are actually contemplating the five aggregates through the six sense doors, and you're able to see that all these, like for example, whether it is craving or whether it is your anger, whether it is your displeasure, or whether it is, anything, any negative emotions that come to your mind, if you actually dissect it in this way, you see that it actually arises through causes and conditions, and therefore there's actually nothing substantial about it. So if anything, if any of these conditions actually cease, then your anger and your craving also dissipates, also disappears. So there's nothing substantive about it. So it is actually empty of some substantive self, and therefore it is actually non-self. So in that sense, this is actually what the Buddha actually asks. If you're a Dhamma speaker, you must actually explain in terms of this non-self nature, all the conditioned phenomena, and you start by watching your mind, because your mind is actually something that's actually the forerunner of all things. The Buddha says in Dhammapada, you must actually watch your mind carefully, because that is a starting point. You must guard your mind like a roof. If you don't guard your mind like a roof, if it's like a rotten roof, and there are holes in it, the rainwater will actually filter through, and everything will be soggy and wet. So you must guard your mind carefully. Whatever sense objects that come into you, just look at it very carefully, whether how are you reacting to it? Is there lobha, dosa, moha in you or not? If you are able to do this, you are doing citta nupassana, in the practice satipatthana, you are actually doing citta nupassana because you are looking at lobha, dosa, moha. Then, of course, when you're angry, you cannot contemplate, but you need to calm yourself down first, So you need to do samatha, So either you do cross-legged and you do maybe anapanasati, which is the static samadhi, or you can actually do dynamic samadhi, by doing other things, like maybe, looking at scenery, doing your house chores, but just distracting your attention, from this that causes you to be angry, So from there, you will be able to calm yourself down, and then once you're calm, then you actually do vipassana, by actually contemplating the non-self nature. So from this, then of the Buddha says, then you'll be able to realize the non-self nature, of the five aggregates, through the six sense doors. So the Buddha actually highlights that if you actually have this intention to follow the teacher, just check for yourself, whether all these are taught by the teacher or not, in terms of looking at the five aggregates, looking at the five sense doors, because if it's a true Dhamma teacher, then all these must actually be covered in the talk and must be expounded clearly, so that the non-self nature is actually understood well, by the disciples, and the students, And the Buddha says that this watching the mind is very important. If you actually look at this Samyutta Nikaya 35.153, the Buddha says, if you just look clearly, at your own mind, if you just watch your mind clearly, whether there is lobha, dosa, moha in you, and whether there is no lobha, dosa, moha in you, you are capable of actually attaining arahantship even in this very life. The Buddha is saying that that if you just watch your mind, okay, and know if greed, hatred, and delusion arises in your mind, and you actually contemplate using samatha and vipassana, like what the Buddha has taught, then in this 35.153, the Buddha says, you are capable of attaining arahantship. You can even become a sotapanna. So this is actually how important it is. Actually, this is actually what the Buddha called is a kayagata sati, which I also shared with you in this book, Anguttara Book of One. You can go back and look for it. Book of One, Sutta 575 to 582. This Anguttara Nikaya, right? The Buddha talks about kayagata sati, which is actually watching the mind. Watching the mind is very, very important. That is so powerful. It can actually lead you all the way from sotapanna all the way to arahantship. In this very lifetime itself. This is how powerful this kayagata sati is, which is watching the mind. So it is very, very important. So here in this suttas we find the Buddha has given us so many pointers as to how to choose and follow the right teacher. So we must be careful and we must be circumspect. Whatever that we learn from the teacher. Of course, I'm not asking you to be disrespectful to teachers, but you must be respectful. But at the same time, you must also be wise, and you must also be circumspect, by whatever that has been taught to you. As you can see from this Digha Nikaya 16, the 4 great references, the Buddha says, you may have heard this Dhamma taught by this very well-known monk, who is so regarded as very senior, well practiced, very pure in sila, and is believed to have achieved high stages of concentration and meditation, And even if you hear the Dhamma from this such a person, the Buddha says, look at this paragraph. He says, the declaration of such a bhikkhu is neither to be received with approval nor with scorn. The Buddha is asking you, don't just accept it. Or don't just scorn it, means look down upon it. Without approval or without scorn, carefully study the sentence word by word. One should trace them in the suttas, the discourses, and verify them by the discipline, by the vinaya. If they are neither traceable in the sutta or not verifiable by the vinaya, then one must conclude this. Certainly, this is not the Blessed One's utterance. This has been misunderstood by the bhikkhu or by the community of elders. But if you actually trace this, what has been taught in the suttas, and go back, and trace them carefully, and if it's there, then you should actually accept it as the Buddha's words, and you actually then embrace it, and practice it in accordance with that word. So the Buddha says, I want to just leave you with this observations, that whatever that whoever we teach, we must actually be careful. We must be circumspect. Always believe always actually remember what the Buddha has actually taught in terms of the 4 great references. Always refer back to the suttas, and always verify, and also whatever that you actually learn from the teacher, then of course. We do respect that, but at the same time, we must also be very circumspect and inspect it, investigate it for yourself, whether this teacher, he's actually teaching the right Dhamma, based on the suttas, and also observe, in terms of, his characters, like what is been mentioned in the suttas, investigate, in terms of the characters, in terms of his behavior, in terms of what he teaches. So all these will then lead us in the right direction, and then we'll be able to, with this guidance, then we know that we are on the right path. And of course, I also advise you to actually, study the sutta, as much as possible, so that we become, so that we keep on practicing, until one fine day, when we become sotapannas ourselves, we become stream enterers. Then the Buddha says, if you are stream enterer, then you are independent of teachers. Means you do not quite. You're not quite easily swayed by any teacher telling you this is right or wrong, because you are already perfect in view. You know the Buddha's teaching very well, and you actually seen it yourself. Know and see the Buddha very well, the teaching very well, and you become independent of teachers. So when we are at that stage, then we'll be able to be guided by the suttas and not so much by what others tell us. So with this, I hope that will give you some motivation and encouragement, to practice the Buddha, the teachings of the Buddha, based on what the Buddha has taught in the suttas, so that we can walk this spiritual path, slowly and gradually, so that we can actually be able to uproot all the fetters, and overcome and all the sufferings, so that we can actually get out of this samsara, gradually, but surely.